And that's when I crossed paths with Matt Mochary. I had cold emailed him and said, can I have 150 copies of your book, please? And will you come and speak? What do I care about? What order do I care about these things? And why? When you have 50% confidence that you can do it, just go and do it. And don't take no for an answer.
I loved how you actually put it into percentage. You're like 50%. This is a good enough threshold. Go on and
it's good enough.
Challenge. And the countdown is over. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Scaling Stories podcast. I'm super excited about our guest today, Regina Gerbeaux. And she is a former entrepreneur turned executive turned founder coach who's worked with top tier technology founders. She's also the first person, I believe, who was trained by Matt Mochary in the famous Mochary method curriculum. And she specializes in helping founders and executives navigate the challenges of scaling their businesses, building their teams. And in the past, Regina bootstrapped her own business and sold it before reaching age 20, I believe. She was also...
Not early.
Okay. There was something about age 20.
I hit the company like in college, but did not sell it at that point yet.
Okay, got it. And yeah, and you were head of operations at On Deck.
That's right.
And then later on, chief of staff and the COO at the Mochary method. I am super excited to have you and just to even reflecting on that trajectory. It must have been so exciting to have been to all those places. Could you describe your own story in your own words and what drove you to all those places that you've been to?
Sure. So I come from a pretty humble working class background. My parents were both immigrant refugees. They were boat people from China and Vietnam and came to San Francisco as refugees. And so I think entrepreneurship has always been seen as a ticket out of really bad situations in my family. My dad ended up, after he was bussing tables and waiting tables, he ended up opening his first restaurant in the Bay Area, and my mom stayed home and took care of us. So I think already from a really early age, I was interested in the concept of entrepreneurship. I ended up starting a music school when I was around 19 years old, because I wish it was a sexy entrepreneurship story. Fair warning, it's not. I was going to community college and had bills to pay and rent to make. And so I started teaching piano. It was a combination of discovering that I had this love for education and for teaching and shaping minds and people of all walks of life, helping them find this central core mission, which was to really love and enjoy music. And I think with that being sort of the North Star, I learned how to build my own business by, creating my own methodology and taking students through lots of different learning styles and making it so that it wasn't your traditional piano lesson. So by the time I was 20, I had a full studio and a waiting list that was about a year long. I didn't know at the time that that was what people called product market fit, but I was very fortunate to experience that. And that's when I decided to scale by hiring and training new teachers on how to use my teaching methodology to help kids really love learning and love practicing. I don't know if you've ever played a musical instrument, Mika, but nobody ever likes practicing.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool just watching us go from just like one person, me, traveling to all of my students' homes, to having an actual music school with lots of teachers and hundreds of students. And they were good too. The kids, they loved playing piano, but they also, won competitions. And I've had kids play at Carnegie Hall and pass exams with flying colors. So I really got to see how entrepreneurship, one, got me out of a really tough situation with the upbringing I had, and also to make a tremendous difference in people's lives. So after, I got married around 2018, I took a sabbatical, what I thought was going to be a 3-month sabbatical. The sabbatical lasted about a week because I was bored out of my mind. And that's when I, looked at my husband, who is a software engineer, and I realized I didn't know anything about startups, or I didn't even know what startups were. Just knew that he worked on a computer for a living. And that's when I thought to myself, I need to learn what this is, because apparently, according to my husband, he just writes a couple of lines of code and he pushes it And then thousands, if not millions of people are using it. So the economies of scale just blew my mind. And that's when I realized I need to try building a business in tech. And at that time, I didn't have any technical skills. So I thought to myself very simply, oh, well, I've started a company before. I'll just start another company. It's fine. Not realizing what that was going to be like. So, I so many other people went through YC Startup School, and I started building a project, my first tech startup project, and just kind of learned the ropes on what it's like to build a company and what it's like to think about iterating fast and talking to customers. I think I did like 500 user interviews in like 3 weeks, right? And was really just learning what it was like to work at on a startup. A little bit after that, I realized if I wanted to eventually be a founder or connect very deeply with people in this space, it would make the most sense for me to go and try to learn how to think like a technical person. So I started taking classes on how to code just so that I could learn to think like a technical person. And I really think that there's so much translation between the business world and like the hands-on experience I was getting building a profitable bootstrapped company and like thinking like a technical person, understanding how to decompose problems, how to think systematically. And so all of this experience culminated. I eventually sold the music school because I was so enamored. I fell in love with tech and I just was like, I need to move into this space. That's when I started at On Deck. I joined when we were only about 20 people. I think by the time I left, we were at 150. So it was really just the early days of seeing us go from only 2 fellowships to over 20, and going from 20 employees to 150 and seeing what it was like going from a seed stage startup all the way to, post Series A, 20 million raised and led by a founders fund. And it was just such a whirlwind experience. And so that's how I ended up in tech. And I guess I could talk a little bit more about going into executive coaching. I discovered executive coaching on accident. Really what it was there was a fellowship that I was helping with the launch of at On Deck. It was On Deck Scale, which was a fellowship targeted specifically for scaling stage founders, anyone Series A and beyond. And that's when I crossed paths with ex-Mochary. I had cold emailed him and said, can I have 150 copies of your book, please? And will you come and speak? Not knowing who he was. And we stayed in touch during that process. And he said, a couple months later that he was looking for a chief of staff. So I reached out and I remember we were on the phone and he said, Regina, why the F do you want this job? This is going to be the craziest job you'll ever have. And I told him, honestly, it sounds like a chief of staff role, like is a really hardcore operations role and one where you're required to run through brick walls. And I don't know anyone better at running through brick walls than me. And 2 weeks later I had a new job. So that's how I stumbled into executive coaching. And while I was chief of staff and COO, I had the privilege of sitting in on all of the coaching sessions that Matt did with like amazing founders, like founders that we read about on TechCrunch or wherever online on Twitter. And I got to see real human beings solving really tough problems. And I got to see what they tried, what worked, what didn't work. And so I started building all these mental models and pattern recognition just from all the repetition I'd seen from companies in the early stages all the way to like post IPO. And that's how I got into executive coaching. It just felt like a marriage between the best of both of my worlds in education and in tech. So,
wow, that is so fascinating. Did you just cold email Matt and you were like 150 copies for like,
yes.
You were just like, hey, I need this. And that is it?
Yes, I said hello. Yes, I said hello. My name is Regina Gerbeaux. I lead operations at On Deck. We are launching a fellowship. We like your book. We want your book in our swag packs. Can you please help me figure out how to order 150 copies of your book? Because Amazon is capping me at 20 and I would like to get 150. And he emailed me back 5 minutes later and said, try to order from this link. And, the book is self-published. So he was trying to get me to order it that way. The self-publishing company gave me such a freaking hard time. And so I emailed him back saying, I appreciate all of your help. I just need you to know they're giving me a hard time. And they're saying that you're the only one who's allowed to order these books. And so he placed the order and he was like, I'm going to gift all these to you. And I love talking to founders. So do you want me to come and speak to all of your founders and do a fireside chat like an AMA? Do you want me to come and talk to the internal team at On Deck? And I remember thinking, this is a pretty good win. Oh, that's how I met Matt. Just
That is
emailed
so
him.
amazing. It's like, okay, somebody who wants 150 copies of my book, I should probably consider to ask them if they want to be my chief of staff.
Well, he had shared. So Matt is famous for like writing all of his curriculum on Google Docs, right? He just writes it on a Google Doc and puts it like in this monster doc full of links to all his write-ups. And I remember seeing, oh, he's hiring a chief of staff. And I thought to myself, I've had 3 people tell me in the last month that I'd make a really good chief of staff, but I don't
Mhm.
know what a chief of staff is. So I went on Google and I typed in what is a chief of staff for startups, and that's when I found out, oh, actually I could see how this role would be the best role to learn a lot about how startups are made and what the secret sauce is, and to have a front row seat so that you can literally go and do anything else. And I really believe that about operations roles in general, but specifically with the chief of staff. I know so many incredibly talented chiefs of staffs that have gone on to own different parts of the companies. Like there was one who I knew that it was a B2B company where customer service was so important. And so she ended up going off to become VP of customer success after like a 1.5 year tour as a chief of staff. I know someone else that ended up becoming like senior director of strategic something like initiatives. And so they went off to go and run special projects. And so you really can go anywhere after. And I think it's a great role for people who want to build a company someday or work very closely with founders. But they have to be willing to do the hard work. The chief of staff role is not for the faint of heart, especially ones that are like proper chief of staff roles. You just have to be willing to do everything. I told Matt when I first got the job that I would be willing to sit in on all the sessions and like help him launch like a fund and help him like build out his, offerings. But I also would not be above taking out the trash and folding his laundry. So yeah, you need to be willing to do everything.
Yeah, there is, yeah, absolutely. I had Scott, the founder of the Chief of Staff Network, on this podcast,
Oh,
and he was saying,
amazing.
yeah, and it was such an amazing conversation. He was saying that he decided to become Chief of Staff, I think in 2016, he heard about this role, and
Yeah.
then FEC actually told him because they considered this to be a really good path to become a founder later on. Like if you've
Yeah,
gone through this role,
exactly. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
super interesting. I'm hearing so much in your story. There is persistence, curiosity. You seem to be somebody who just goes on and starts like learning how to code while you're still running your music business.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that was happening in parallel.
Yeah, not a lot of people.
Yeah. Some of those chapters were overlapping. Do you have a framework or maybe a method for how you make those decisions? Like, do you just wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm just going to learn how to code or do YC startup school, or maybe I should consider this chief of staff role?
So the short answer is no, that's not the way I make decisions. And I guess the short answer is instead of relying on specific milestones, like very specific events or roles to happen, I think that's the wrong way to think about growth. I think the best way to think about growth is understanding yourself very deeply, going into self-introspection and looking at what do I care about? What order do I care about these things and why? Right? That's what I call integrity. When you live in this where you are able to identify what really matters to you most and why, I feel like that is a great embodiment of living in integrity. And if anybody wants to learn more about what that's like, Martha Beck is an amazing coach, and she's the one who wrote this book called The Way of Integrity. And so for me, I think very deeply about what matters to me the most. And I think every single time I've tried something new, it's always been in pursuit of aligning to my integrity. Something is off, and I'm ready to shift to figure out what it looks like to live in integrity. So, for example, with music moving into tech, that was a big transition, right? I had gotten a bachelor's and master's degree in piano performance and had built this school and bootstrapped it to almost $1 million in ARR. Why would I ever leave? The natural path would have been, okay, and then go and like release a course and teach other teachers how to like use your method, and then write a book and like publish a whole curriculum and then franchise the business. There's like a very clear, trajectory on what that would look like. But to me, my integrity was off. And I could tell because I was starting to feel very bored by the process. It no longer felt like a challenge. And to me, living in integrity for me means I have to constantly be challenged because I value curiosity very, very high. It's one of my top 10 values. And that's when I realized that I was no longer interested in swimming in the small pond that I was a part of, which was, small solopreneur businesses that capped because they were service-based and, had a really high bar for the kind of person that you could bring in to work with you. And so that's when I thought to myself, okay, I need a challenge. Now the challenge could have looked so different, Mika. It could have been, going into tech, but it also very easily could have been, going into figuring out logistics and like operations and going into, I don't know, something not so sexy like construction or owning multiple small businesses. There's so many different ways it could have gone. It just so happened that my path was going into tech because I was exposed to it. I realized this fits a lot of the things I'm looking for in terms of how I want the next chapter of my life to unfold. And that's what led me down the right path, was that even if at the very end I ended up not going into tech, ended up not changing careers, I would come out a better person and a wiser person, hopefully, through that experience, right? And the same thing happened with the chief of staff role. Every single role I had after transitioning into tech, I'd never heard of until, I experienced it. So the example I'll give you is like when I Googled what is a chief of staff, I didn't know. And so I remain a firm believer that the best roles for me are the ones that I don't even know exist yet, right? I don't know they exist. I don't know what the role is supposed to be. Maybe the role hasn't even been invented yet. And I think I can generally apply that principle even to when I look at founders starting companies today. I mean, we would be foolish to think that all the roles that exist today are static. I mean, we've already seen that with the boom of AI. Like all of a sudden people are like, what are prompt engineers? Like, why is that even a thing? And of course, all the people that have been in AI for forever are laughing at everyone else now because they're like, great, the work we're doing is finally mainstream, right? But we would be so silly to think that everything is static when in reality, as we have forward momentum and progress, everything changes. So I don't look for specific roles. I don't say, okay, and then I'm going to hit this role and then I'm going to have this title and then I'm going to go and work at this kind of company. That is too rigid and limits your ability to find really cool opportunities that you just have never considered before. Yeah.
That is so interesting. It sounds like, so in summary, it sounds like you start with very deep self-reflection. So what is very important to me? What are my core values? Curiosity, other things, to be in true integrity with yourself.
Absolutely.
And then you would go on and see where that can take you and also looking for a new challenge. It's so interesting. You put it very well. You said, all the roles that you did, you actually didn't know that they existed. And
exactly.
I think it's so fascinating because often I think we also ask ourselves like, oh, are we really qualified for the role? Like if you know what this role is about, you're probably already qualified.
Right. And I would say the roles that we're best suited for are the ones where we feel like we're 50% certain we can actually do, right? Like if you're a founder and you're going in and you're like, I can do this, I have no problems, like you're in for a very rude awakening. I'm sorry. Like every founder comes in and they're like, I know what things I probably should do and I know what questions I should be asking, but it's not a walk in the park. It's not for the faint of heart, right? So that same uncertainty that you feel when you're a founder, you should probably feel even if you aren't starting a company, even if you're being asked to be a co-founder or like being asked to be part of early team. Let's say that you're trying to hire a founding engineer and like this, you find the perfect candidate for your company, but the candidate is like, I don't know, I've never been a founding engineer. I don't know, like, do I have the right experience? Like, there is an argument to be made depending on the kind of company and depending on like what your objectives are. If this person has like this crazy slope and they're also, their core competencies are there so that they will be performing at a high, degree of execution. Like, let's say that they've never been a manager before, but they're an excellent engineer. I don't think that that's a good enough reason for someone to say, no, like that person doesn't check off all the boxes, right? So we definitely should err on the side of choosing roles that we're afraid of when we can, because that's where the most growth happens.
I loved how you actually put it into percentage. You're like 50%. This is a good enough threshold. Go on and
It's
start
good
this new
enough.
challenge. I loved how you actually put it into percentage. You're like 50%. This is a good enough threshold. Go on and
It's
start
good
this new
enough.
challenge.
Well, because if it's 50% today, and then you decide to commit to it, well, if you're committing to it, then you have to do the work. I am not saying commit to something and then just sit on your hands and say, well, I'll grow into it eventually. You have to be hungry and willing to learn, right? I remember when my partner started his, like, the current company he's at, it's a climate tech company, and he doesn't have like a battery science degree or like a chemistry degree, and he had been working in building web apps for so long, but he was so interested in making this transition. So I told him the same thing. When you have 50% confidence that you can do it, just go and do it, and then work your ass off to like close the gap, right? And don't take no for an answer. So he ended up joining this company and worked his butt off and read and studied and learned everything he could about battery science so that he could hit the ground running and close the gap, right? Yeah, I do think a lot of it is just sheer determination and the ability to not give in to fear and apprehension when you don't know certain things.
Regina, I would love to, we started talking about it a little bit already. I would love to shift this conversation to your insights and observations and common themes that you've seen among founders. I know the media usually portrays the founder as somebody who is this visionary leader, somebody who's ready to take on any challenge. Have you yourself noticed some common traits that are very typical for founders and that usually lead to certain issues that then you get to work with?
That question did not go the direction I thought it was going to go. Okay, so traits that founders have that lead to certain issues. Well, a big one, especially the younger the founder, the more true this is. The younger the founder, the more they think that they have to pretend to be someone they're not. In general, I think founders have a healthy dose of, oh, I have to show up this way for my investors, I have to show up this way for my, team, I have to show up this way for my candidates. And there is some degree of truth in that. The problem is when the founder is not self-aware enough to know that they're putting on different personalities. So when I work with a founder, and a founder comes to me and says, I don't get it, I'm having a really difficult time raising, which is a problem I hear sometimes, right? Like, super talented founder should be able to close a round, something is in the way, something is blocking. When we really dive deep into it, it turns out this person is trying to be someone like that they're not for the investor, right? And they ask me, do I have to just be like a jerk? Because I'm seeing all my other friends who are being total assholes to like these investors, and they're like complete condescending pricks, and then they get preempted. Like, how does that make any sense, right? It's like the genius jerk, right? And I said, look, it's not about pretending to be someone you're not, right? It's gonna be the thing that closes your round. The thing that's going to close your round is if you can remain super committed to talking about your vision for the company. Because one thing that every great founder I see has in common, and these are the founders that I coach, right? They all feel just such a passionate burning fire for whatever problem they're solving. It doesn't have to be personal either. I think there's a common trope that it has to be personal. I think working on a problem that is personal is great. And it certainly doesn't hurt. That being said, I've seen founders that are like, I'm not passionate about accounting because I've never been an accountant before. But you know what I am passionate about? I am passionate about solving problems. And this is a problem that I have decided is worthy of solving. That tends to be the attitude I see more in technical founders, because technical founders tend to be focused on how difficult and complex is this problem, and do I think I can crack this problem, right? So when you going back to investor conversations or customer conversations, when you show up and you're so focused on making your customer's life better, it naturally focuses the conversation on what actually matters. It's not a VC who's saying, well, who else have you talked to? And who else is like going to participate in this round? You're directing the conversation to what matters the most and what you have really good knowledge and insight. Like, I think a lot of founders forget that they are probably the most knowledgeable person on this planet for whatever it is they're working on. So we get to work on things like that. And there's a big part of showing up as someone you aren't authentically, wrapped up in a base emotion of fear. right? There's this fear that you're not good enough. There's this fear that the markets have turned and that you're just like always having the worst timing or the worst luck. There's fear that you didn't go to the right schools, that you didn't rub elbows with the right people, that you didn't go to the right first, 2, 3 jobs. Like there's always a fear. And so even with my most successful founders, the people that look like on the outside, they check off all the boxes, there is always a feeling of, well, did I do everything right? And that's natural. Like founders want to always be the best that they can be. So I think it's perfectly natural for founders to have this immediate reaction to their own stories and like their own trajectories. Like, is it good enough? Right. And so from there, we unpack that fear. And Mika, you know this, we have talked about this before, but fear always stems from a story that you're telling yourself. And the story that you're telling yourself is just that. It's a story. It's a thought that lives in your brain. And the faster founders can understand, just because you think something doesn't make that thought true, the sooner they can debug their own minds and move past their fear and make really sound judgments and decisions based in truth, which is, not amplified by the amygdala screaming at you saying that you're about to die. And so, let's see, I can give you an example. If I have a founder who comes to me and says, I have to fire like 20% of my team. We saw a lot of reduction in force, a lot of layoffs, this year and last year. And so there was a lot of that for the past year and a half. There were a lot of founders who said, I fired people before, but this is my first time letting a lot of people go. This is my first time cutting, the team, not because people are necessarily underperforming, but because we just need to be leaner, or just because we need to preserve runway, or just because we overhired and now we have to correct, or, insert any number of very valid, legitimate reasons. And founders then feel this fear, like, oh, do I actually have to cut people? Do I want to cut people? How do I reward loyalty? Like if people, were here from the beginning and they're just not keeping up with the new talent, how do I let someone go without being the worst person alive for letting people go? And so then we talk about the story, right? I say, what's the story you're telling yourself? And they might say something like, the story I'm telling myself is, if I let people go, especially the earliest people, then people are going to think I'm a class A prick. People are going to think I don't value loyalty. They're going to say, Regina, the CEO, is not loyal to us. So why should we be loyal to them? My whole team is going to be demoralized. They're going to quit. The outside perception is that the investors and the news articles, they're going to write hit pieces about me. They're going to tell me that, they're going to tell everyone Regina is the worst founder. We have no idea why anyone ever handed her a single dollar, right? And the whole company is going to fall apart. And it's the beginning of the end. That's usually the story that I hear when it comes to layoffs, right? And it makes total sense. And so then we ask, what is the alternative story here, right? What's the alternative story here? Well, the story is maybe, people won't leave. Maybe we can nail the narrative. And that's why I think comms is so important. What is the story that you're telling here? Even to the team, can you say this is our opportunity to win, and we're not doing anyone any favors by retaining an overbloated team? That's a faster way to die as a company. So I have to make hard decisions. And these are really incredibly difficult decisions. Can we offer some sort of reassurance that we're actually treating the people that we let go right? Are we offering them 3 months of severance? Are we taking care of their health expenses? Are we, letting them leave with dignity? Are we writing them glowing reference letters? Are we extending our networks to help them? If all these things are true, then the chances of all the other bad things happening that your fear brain tells you go down dramatically, right? And so that's when we debug the fear. And that's when we make our best decisions. And then the last thing I'll say with fear-based decisions is separating the decision from the implementation. So I can't take credit for this. This came from Wei Deng, the CEO of Clipboard Health. But she shared this amazing concept of taking a decision, a really hard decision, and not even thinking about how painful it's going to be before you execute it. Just looking at the facts and saying, objectively, what is the best best thing to do here without thinking about all the painful stuff. Like, how do we, like, oh, we're going to have to tell people this and then they're going to feel bad. And then, oh, this is going to cost so much money. It's like, what here is truly like the most objectively good decision? Make the decision and then go implement it, but don't let the implementation affect the decision making, right? So I love that concept. And that's something that I get to work with my founders on, just like debugging the mind and finding where they're triggered, either in fear or anger. Anger is another big one.
Yeah. I love that. I think one big common trait that you mentioned is that usually people become founders. They're always challenging themselves. They want to become the better versions of themselves. And then the biggest fear is kind of like, what if I never become that? What if I'm not good enough for this? What if I set myself on this path? And whenever you have these hard times, you have certain emotions that you're dealing with. You were so gracious and you offered me this coaching session that we did yesterday where you told me about, and that's why, like, as you were talking about this, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm recognizing some things that we discussed yesterday. You talked about fear, anger, and sadness, and that every person has one certain thing, or their amygdala leads to one emotion more frequently than others.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
Everybody has this one thing. And that was an example with fear, right? And that leads to
Yes.
certain decisions. And I guess the other insight is that we tend to, I guess, tell ourselves the story. I don't know. I think our brain is designed this way that we're just made for storytelling, and we start developing
100%.
all these scenarios. Your insight is to think in sequences, right? So first think about the best decision to make, and then think about the consequences and the implementation, all of that.
Yeah, that would be the second part of what I was saying. The first part is identify the trigger. Second part is identify the story. Third part is figure out where you might be distorting your story. So there's really great cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that you can use here. You can find, where are you making assumptions? Where are you exaggerating? Where are you mind reading? Where are you like crystal balling into the future? There's so many ways our minds distort, the fear story. So if you can identify, the third thing is identify where you're distorting the story, figure out fourth, what the true story is likely going to be now that you've like unpacked the fear, and then finally do what you just said, which is figure out how to make the best decision without thinking about the implementation, and then go implement after you've made the decision. Yeah,
I love that. Puts things into perspective.
Yeah, and a good way to think about triggers as well is to look into your own personal life. So a lot of founders think when they start coaching that we're just going to be talking all like strategy and company specific, but that's not entirely true. There's all sorts of personal things that come up because whether you like it or not, you are you. Like there's no work you and personal you. Your personality is just your personality. So if a founder has a difficult time identifying what their triggers are, I ask them to talk to their spouse or their partner or their friends or their parents or anyone who knows them really well, and I tell them, ask that person, what are my triggers? Like, do I tend to get angry really quickly? Do I get scared really quickly and then shirk away? Or do I just want to curl up in a ball and cry and like withdraw, right? Because that'll give you a really good idea. And sometimes there are different trigger emotions for different situations. So for example, a lot of people react in fear. It's the most basic one, right? Even anger is just a permutation of fear. People get angry. Why? Because they're afraid of something. So when you feel anger, it's important to ask yourself, what am I afraid of here? Because that will actually teach you what the original trigger is. What's the original thing that is making you scared, which is making you lash out in anger to someone. And the same thing with sadness. If you're sad about something, you're probably scared of something in the future, right? You're scared of something in the future. If you're angry, you're scared about something in the past.
Interesting. So even sadness and anger usually have their root in fear.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this earlier, Mika. It's evolutionary, right? We were designed to have this amygdala. The amygdala was the thing that kept our ancestors alive for so long. So if you heard a rustling in the bush, you didn't, it was better for you to assume it was a saber-toothed tiger, even if it's a little fuzzy bunny, not going to kill you. And so your brain is amplifying that to save you from something. But the thing is, most of us live in a place where we're physically safe. Like we're not at risk of getting hunted right now in our offices or getting attacked by some wild animal or like a a predator of any sort. So it evolved that way. And to your point about storytelling, we are story-driven, narrative-driven creatures. The reason for that is because you can't have memory without stories. So when we form memories, we're always trying to construct stories. That's also why humans, when we look in the clouds and we see like a picture of something or we recognize an animal, is pattern recognition. And this is for a way for us to tell a story and to make sense and meaning out of what would otherwise seem very meaningless.
Yeah, amazing. I noticed myself sometimes like interpreting what happened today, and now I would develop it in this story. I would connect it to some memory from my childhood, and I'm like, I don't even know how I connected these dots, but I was like, I would develop the story, and then I need to write it down because it's just on my mind all the time. I can't even eat dinner before, like I need to write down the whole.
Absolutely. The best revealing situation that we are story-driven creatures is when you go to sleep at night and you have dreams. So if you are sleeping well and you enter deep sleep and then you enter REM and you have an 8 hours of sleep, you can tend to remember your dreams pretty well. If you don't, you probably have to shift your sleep routine. You probably need more sleep. You probably need to reduce the amount of caffeine that you're intaking. But by and large, most people have vivid memories of dreams, or memories of vivid dreams when they sleep well enough. And the dreams are your brain's way of figuring out like how to make sense out of the stuff that you see in the day, right? And that's why sometimes when you go to sleep and you have these weird dreams and they're all the things that you had talked about throughout the day, that's your brain trying to make sense of everything that has happened, and it's trying to sort out what it's going to store as a memory, as a core memory in your brain, and what it's going to discard, right? And that's why stories are so important.
Brains are doing all the work while you're sleeping. Is there something that you can recommend to people to follow during their day-to-day to remember how to analyze where the triggers are coming from, just to like, oh, maybe I should take a moment and think, what triggered me now? Why? Is there something that we can take as a practical tip to follow?
Absolutely. So there are two things that I'll recommend. The first one is something you're familiar with, Mika. It's the concept of fear journaling. So when you are triggered and you notice you're triggered, how can you spot it? You can feel like clammy hands. Maybe you feel your stomach churning. Maybe your heart rate goes up, you're breathing harder and maybe more shallower, but faster. That's a good time to take a physical journal and write out what you're feeling. So you can say, I'm scared, and the story I'm telling myself is, and you basically go through all the steps. I notice I'm triggered. I have this fear. The story I'm telling myself is blah. And this is where I'm probably distorting. My fear is distorting the story. Here's what's probably likely going to happen, and then go back and revisit it. And what you'll find is as you're fear journaling, you're creating a log of all the times your fear tells you the wrong story. Your fear is almost always wrong. At best, it's like completely false. And at worst, there are parts that may be true, but those parts that are true are things that you probably would have identified without fear, and the fear is just exaggerating a bunch of stuff that isn't true anyway. So I would fear journal. Most founders that do this find results within 48 hours because you get scared all the time. You get scared like frequently, and you get triggered in meetings, you get triggered in one-on-ones, you get triggered when your partner asks you what you want to have for dinner for the 30th time. You get triggered all the time. And so as you write this out, you start realizing, holy shit, I get triggered a lot. And I feel fear all the time. How often am I making decisions from a place of fear instead of a place of possibility, or at the very minimum at a baseline, of a non-triggered state? So that's the first thing I'll recommend, fear journaling. The second thing I'll recommend is particular meditation. So we talked about being able to practice mindfulness yesterday. And mindfulness is the act of observing without judgment, right? All fear is judgment, judgment, judgment. So the fear journaling is a direct reaction or a response to when you are in a triggered state. But mindfulness is the preventative. It's preventative health. If like fear journaling is the ER, preventative health is your annual wellness checkup and like all the exercise you're doing. So there's a specific kind of meditation that I would recommend. It's by this practitioner called Shinjin Young, and it's called the See, Hear, Feel meditation. And anybody can do this, and you don't have to do it for a long time. Anybody can do this for 5 minutes, and they will already have results. So the See, Hear, Feel meditation is basically where you sit and you can set a timer for 5 minutes. But all you do is you notice. You notice whether you are seeing, whether you are hearing, or whether you are feeling. And so the way we might describe it is seeing visually everything around you and noticing. But seeing is also the things that you see in your head, because we have two different visions, right? We have the imagination, we can imagine things in our minds, and we also have the actual physical visual. So that's visualizing. Hearing is hearing actual sounds around you. Maybe you're hearing your own breathing. Maybe you're hearing your heartbeat. Maybe you're hearing the vacuum outside. But you could also be hearing your inner chatter, your dialogue. So as you're narrating things, you just say, here. And by the way, sorry, I skipped that step. When you're seeing things, you just label it see. And you either notice whether it goes away or whether you stay on it. And you just stay on it without judgment. So if I say see, then I can notice. That's all it is. It's just noticing, right? Same thing with hearing. I'm hearing myself talking. I'm hearing my inner chatter. Here. And the last one is feel. So if you have feelings of emotions, if you feel things in your body, maybe you start noticing the clothing touching your skin, maybe you're feeling a draft of wind touching you, then you label it as feel. And you do this for 5 minutes. And the best part is you don't have to do it with your eyes closed. I think a lot of people think when you meditate, you have to like sit in a lotus position with your arms in a funny way and with your eyes closed and humming. Like, I actually think it's so wonderful that Shinjin Young says, practice this with your eyes open, because what that does is it simulates real life. If you were able to do this, like I would recommend doing it for 15 minutes. I think 5 is better than nothing. But if you can spend 15 minutes every day, just feeling and labeling, when you get to your meeting and you notice something and you feel something, then you will default to saying feel. Or if you see somebody scowling at you and you notice that and you're like, oh, see. And the thing is, sometimes you might have a situation where all 3 things are being represented, right? Like seeing, hearing, or feeling, or any combination of those 3. Just choose the one. Just choose one. You don't have to go, I'm seeing this person is also making me feel scared and like I'm hearing them yell at me. Whatever comes to mind first. Here. That's what actually makes it so that your blood pressure comes down, your heart rate decreases, because you are sending active signals to your brain. Your prefrontal cortex is taking over and it's saying, oh, we're not in any danger. So that's why you end up being able to let things go. Your road rage goes down. You're triggered, like the feeling of telling your direct report, do you not know anything? Disappears, because you're just labeling at this point without judgment. There's no judgment. And if you feel like judging, then you just say feel. And that's it. And all of your senses can be covered that way. Like, let's say that you smell something or you taste something. That's also like you could quantify that or you could qualify that as like here, if you're thinking, oh, I smell something, right? Or if you smell something and you're like, that smells like bulgogi, and then you picture bulgogi, then you can say that's seeing. Or if you taste something, like let's say you taste the saliva in your mouth and you just had like a delicious coffee or tea, some beverage that you're drinking, then you might be able to label it see, hear, or see or feel, right? Or hear, even if you're labeling it. So the see, hear, feel meditation is so easy to practice and everyone should do it.
Yeah, I love that. So in summary, the fear-based journaling, having a summary of all of your fear logs, which already sounds like fear logs. I don't know how many things I've been scared of in my life. And then the meditation, the see, hear, and feel meditation. I started doing something recently. I realized every time I'm on a internet, I'm surfing and I'm like looking something up and like my page is loading. If it's taking too long, I would go and like check my email, or I would enter a different task just because. And I actually noticed it and I was like, okay, every time it's loading, we're blessed that the internet is not fast enough that I can actually take a moment and just smell the coffee if I'm in a coffee shop, or just like look around and notice the person next to me. So that really resonates.
Yeah, and it's your choice to get irritated at the page not loading quickly enough, right? I think the page not loading is also, I mean, there are so many different schools of thought. Like there are people who say we should never have invented infinite scroll because you just keep scrolling and it lets you get sucked into things. There's something about, do you remember like the Zanga or Blogspot days where you would scroll to the bottom of a page and you would see 1, 2, 3, 20, and you had to consciously click on the second page. there's something about inserting a pause into your life that helps you become responsive rather than reactive. So even with that little scrolling thing, if you see that your page is still loading, Mika, it's a great time for you to check in and say, do I still want to be scrolling? Whenever LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, TikTok, like malfunctions that way, it is helpful to take a pause and notice.
I want to jump into the last topic that I really wanted to talk about, and that is energy audit. You introduced it yesterday to me. I know that we briefly talked about. It's also something that we were thinking, should we introduce this and tackle? And I looked through the document that you've shared, and I think it says something like 70 to 80% of how we spend our time should be energizing for us to feel happy, fulfilled, and all of that. Could you share a little bit about the energy audit itself? So what is it and how people can perform it?
Yeah. I love the energy audit. The energy audit is something I first discovered through Diana Chapman, and then we implemented it at the Mochary method. And it's still something that I feel so passionately about, because the crux of it is you only have 24 hours a day. You might as well be doing things in your life that make you excited and full of energy instead of burning you out and draining you, right? Such a simple concept, and yet it's so mind-blowing because there are so many people who tell themselves a fear-based story that unless they are milking every single minute of the day, doing things even if they don't want to do those things because somebody told them they have to, that their existence doesn't matter, or that their existence is bad and not optimized, right? So in short of it, when I meet founders and they say, I'm burned out, I have too many priorities, everything feels like a priority, everything feels like it's on fire, I'm so overwhelmed, that's the moment where I'll ask them, what are the things that really matter to you? So we do like top 3 goals. And then we also say, how are you spending your time today? Because almost everyone is spending their time in ways that they don't even know. That's why like Tackle is so cool, because then people get to actually visualize how they're spending their time. And so the energy audit concept is you look at your calendar, you take 1 month of your previous calendar activities that are representative of a given month. And I think Tackle offers, like, even with the free plan, like you get 1 month of calendar events. You go through and you label whether things are energizing for you or not. For something to be energizing, it has to be a full-bodied yes. So, for example, if you think about something you absolutely love doing, like a hobby that you have, or spending time with a loved one, or taking time for yourself, the way you feel really, really good about that, you should be like, yes, I love this so much, right? Doesn't mean you want to do it all day long, but it means I really love that I do this. That's a full-bodied yes. Anything that doesn't fall into that is not a full-bodied yes, is a no. So when you have a full-bodied yes, you label that as energy giving. Everything else is energy draining, right? You're going to find there are a lot of stuff in this energy draining pile, right? You go, well, I don't really love this meeting, and I really don't love, my YouTube scrolling time, or whatever it is. Like you have that pile. From there, take all the energy giving things, keep them. Like, these are things that make you really happy. You have your best life that way. Now we're going to look at the no pile. From there, you take the no pile and you say, well, why? Why are these things draining, right? And then you realize, well, I really don't like that meeting because it's not clear who is running the meeting, and it isn't clear why we're still meeting, and we're just kind of meeting because somebody put a standing calendar invite and we all just kind of show up, but it's not really serving a purpose. Okay, you've now discovered, oh, I don't like showing up to meetings where there's no like intended agenda, right? Or you say, oh, man, I've like marked every one-on-one that I have with my skip levels as like not energizing. I just don't like doing one-on-ones with people who I don't actually have like a very close relationship with. Okay, that's really good information. So you go through, you answer why. Now you have a couple of choices. You ask yourself if you still want to do it or not. If the answer is no, like I don't have to do this anymore, then you have a couple of choices. One, you can either get rid of it, like for example with this meeting where there's no like a clearly intended agenda, you can scrap it, and nobody's gonna feel sad, because they all probably feel the same way. And they're like, oh, thank God I have another hour to like, work on my code or to work on my whatever, right? So you can eliminate it. If it's something like, I really hate tagging all of my events on my own, okay, you can automate it, right? Use like an automation, or you can delegate it to someone else, right? Delegation is also possible. So are you the only person who can do this? If you're the CEO, probably like you're probably not the only person who can do it. The only things CEOs can do are things like fundraising and like talking to their board and like setting the mission and vision for the company and that kind of stuff. But if it's like one-on-ones and you're at a state where like they already have another tech lead that they report to, like then there's somebody else who can do it, delegate it, right? So you can eliminate, automate, delegate. You could also choose to make something exquisite. So what that means is in the event that you're like, I don't like doing this, I don't like running all hands, and even then I would argue that it's not necessarily something that only you can do. But let's say that the founder is like, I don't like running all hands, but I know it's super important, especially this early on, I need to own it. Well, then the question is, what would make this super exquisite for you? And the word exquisite is so over the top, but it's meant to be, right? It's meant to make you think, and like, if I made these adjustments, I would really like it. So to continue the example of all hands, you might say something like, well, I wouldn't mind doing it as much if I had someone else put together the slides, if I was able to just talk into ChatGPT and it like automatically spat out like a template or a presentation for me, or if I got to run all hands my way, which would just be a simple memo and like addressing the team, I don't love this town hall portion of all hands right now, I want to get rid of it, maybe there's another way we can change it. But you're basically forcing yourself to say, how could I make this experience really good for myself? And that's how you end up with about 70 to 80% of the things that are actually energizing for you. And then for the things that are not, okay, well, I think it's still pretty great if you can optimize like 80% of your life to be stuff that you're like, yes, I love this, right? So that's the energy audit. And the last thing I'll say with that is make sure you apply it not only to your work life, but also your personal life, right? When you go through a full audit, you should be writing out, yeah, I noticed that I go to the bar 4 times a week for happy hours that I don't actually want to be a part of. Like, don't forget that stuff too. It's important. So that's the energy audit. Everyone should go do one.
Yeah. Amazing. I love this so much. I think the first time you told me about this concept when we just met, energy audit, the first thought that I had was like, wow, this is because as a founder, you're always thinking, oh my God, am I allowed to think about this? I should be thinking about others. I should be thinking about my shareholders, about my company and all of that. Yeah. And this exercise is just for you. And you're allowing yourself to kind of be what may seem selfish to you on a regular day. You're like, oh, can I think so much about myself personally, right?
Sure. So, my only argument to that would be actually it's not selfish, because if you're thinking about yourself, then you're going to be doing the best work. You're going to be operating in what is known as the zone of genius. And that makes you a better founder, and that makes you more focused on the things that actually matter, which ends up giving a better direction to your team. It ends up making investors have trust in you. It means that you're a better founder. You're delivering value to shareholders. Like, it actually makes you better if you think about yourself and like what actually energizes you, right?
Yeah. So it's actually your responsibility to do it.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, the summary here is look through your calendar events, see what gives you energy, what is green, and tackle, see what is green and what is red. And ideally, if it's red, then either withdraw from it, delegate it, or see how you can make it more joyful and more energizing. Regina, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been so wonderful. As a wrap-up question, what is the one book that you have recommended the most?
Oh, gosh. I am an avid reader, so it's going to be hard to recommend something, especially because there are so many different reasons to read different books, right? So because we spent so much time talking about consciousness today and being self-aware and, letting go and surrendering, the book I recommend most often for that specifically is Michael A. Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. He also wrote another book called The Surrender Experiment, which goes through an account of his own life where he surrenders to the flow of life and then sells his company for billions of dollars, even though he never set out to be a tech entrepreneur in the first place. So that's the book I would recommend for people who are trying to be more conscious and awake. But there are so many really amazing books that are not, about consciousness that I could recommend forever. So
I'd do that. Thank you so much, Regina. And I'm so happy we did this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.